This woman is crazy. The story is titled, My Little Brother Set Up a Trap with a Camera When I Let My Affair Come Over and Showed My Husband. Hi, Reddit. I've always been a big fan of this platform, scrolling through memes, joining discussions, but I never imagined I'd find myself here, pouring out my heart to internet strangers. Yet, here I am, hoping that maybe someone out there can learn a lesson from my mistakes, or perhaps just find something funny in my epic level of stupidity. Just, whatever you do, don't judge me too harshly. I've already spent countless nights doing that to myself. My mistake has cost me everything. I cheated on my husband and even let my affair partner come over. My little brother didn't like that, and he exposed me. Some backstory: first, my name is Alicia, and I'm a 34-year-old woman. I've been married to Jason, a 35-year-old man, for 6 years now, but our connection spans a lifetime. Jason and I are childhood sweethearts, inseparable since the playground days. Jason was like the perfect husband. He just got me, you know? It's like he completed me in every way, like finding that last puzzle piece that fits just right. We were total opposites since we were kids. I was the quiet type, not too many friends, while Jason was Mr. Popular, always surrounded by people. He was smart, funny, and the star of the football team, basically the whole package. Me, I was just there. The kind of kid you'd pass in the hallway and forget 2 seconds later. But everyone loved Jason, especially my family. Parents, siblings, aunts, cousins, they all adored him. It's like he was always meant to be part of the family. And my younger brother, who I'll call Vincent in this story for the sake of privacy, he's 18 and he looked up to Jason like he was some kind of hero. He wanted to be just like him right from when he was a kid. Jason and I both decided to wait a bit before getting married. We wanted to make sure we were financially stable first. Jason had a great career ahead of him, and I wanted him to be secure because, let's face it, his stability meant mine too. After some time, we finally tied the knot, and it's been 6 years since then. Well, until the divorce, but I'll get to that later. Things were going really well. Our sex life was okay-ish, and we lived in this huge house thanks to Jason's success. He was making good money, so we were pretty settled. We even started planning for retirement since Jason hoped to retire early before turning 50 and all that jazz. And we have 2 amazing boys, ages 7 and 5. Let's call the oldest Rio and the youngest Carter. I'm changing their names for privacy reasons. When Jason and I first got married, I was working in sales. It wasn't the highest paying job, but it got me out of the house. Eventually, I made the decision to quit and become a full-time stay-at-home mom, especially since Jason was bringing in a good income. Being a stay-at-home mom can get pretty monotonous, you know? And Jason wasn't home much, but I understood. He had to provide for the family. But as I mentioned, being a stay-at-home mom began to feel mundane, especially once the kids started school. I found myself longing for something more, something to break the monotony of daily life. That's when I decided to join the local gym. It was refreshing to meet and connect with others there, and I ended up forming some meaningful friendships. It was also where I met Jacob, my personal trainer. Jacob and I began with a completely platonic relationship. He was my personal trainer, and I was his client. He excelled at his job, and it didn't hurt that he was easy on the eyes. Sure, I entertained thoughts about what it would be like to be with someone like Jacob, but they were just fleeting thoughts. I was married, and I loved my husband deeply. Just because I found someone attractive didn't mean I was betraying my vows. Jacob was incredibly friendly and charming, which made our interactions even more enjoyable. It all began innocently enough, with some playful banter between us. Jacob had a knack for making me laugh, and his charm was undeniable. As our interactions progressed, there were accidental touches and shamelessly staring hard at each other. Looking back, I wish I had put an end to it right then and there. Perhaps if I had, I wouldn't be making this post now. Then things took a turn when Jacob began inviting me out for dinner after our workouts. He'd wait for me while I changed, and then we'd head out together to grab a meal. Jacob seemed to understand me in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time, and I found myself feeling increasingly lonely. My husband's demanding job left him exhausted and preoccupied, and that left me craving companionship and understanding. As Jacob and I spent more time together, we grew closer. He really listened to me, and understood what I was going through, something I didn't always feel from my husband. Our chats went beyond just fitness stuff. We talked about everything. I opened up to him about my worries, and he shared his own struggles too. Our hangouts went from grabbing dinner to just chilling over coffee, chatting for hours. There was this pull between us that kept getting stronger, and even though I felt guilty, being with Jacob was like a breath of fresh air in my routine life. He became my go-to person, the one who made me happy when everything else felt dull. And as time went on, our friendship started feeling like something more. We were definitely flirting shamelessly, but I kept telling myself it was harmless. And besides, even if it did go further, it wasn't entirely my fault, right? I mean, maybe if my husband had more time for us, I wouldn't have been looking elsewhere. One day, I impulsively invited Jacob over to my place. He didn't have much money and still lived with his parents, unfortunately, so he couldn't entertain me at their house. He'd come over when the kids were at school and we'd hang out. It was convenient since it was usually just me and the kids at home or just me when they were at school. One day, like always, Jacob came over. We opened a bottle of wine and started chatting. With the kids at school, we had plenty of time to ourselves. After a few drinks, our conversation turned to our love lives. Jacob admitted he wasn't into commitment and preferred being with multiple partners. I shared my feelings of loneliness in my marriage, how my husband's busy schedule left me feeling neglected. Jacob agreed and said it was weird that he had never ever met my husband, and then he suggested something unexpected. He said he could help me feel less lonely despite my love for my husband. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking, but he insisted he was serious, proposing that we could help each other out. I brushed it off, saying he was drunk, and we could discuss it later when he was sober. I needed to pick up the kids soon anyway, so I asked him to leave. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the thought of Jacob's offer. What if I accepted it? I was so desperate for companionship, and my husband wouldn't even know. I tried to justify it to myself, searching for any excuse to fill the void of loneliness. After pondering it all day, I convinced myself that my husband wouldn't be hurt if he didn't know. Isn't that how the saying goes? So I decided to accept Jacob's offer. But first, I needed to make sure he was serious. I messaged him and he confirmed he was still on board. He respected my decision either way, but he was willing to help me feel less lonely. Looking back, it was the dumbest decision ever. But before you judge, try feeling the kind of loneliness that eats away at your soul. It leaves you feeling hollow, like nothing can fill the void. I was desperate, and that's how it started with Jacob. Since he still lived with his parents, it made sense to meet at my place. My husband was hardly ever home, and the kids were at school during the day. Why waste money on a hotel when my house was empty? So we'd hang out there, spending hours together. It became our comfortable little haven, and our connection grew stronger. It felt like Jacob and I were in a real relationship. Sometimes I even forgot I was married to someone else. He made me feel so alive and complete, like I'd been missing out on something big. Sure, I felt guilty about cheating on my husband, but what's done is done. We settled into a routine of comfort and secrecy. Jacob couldn't leave anything at my house in case my husband found it, and he couldn't be around when my husband or the kids were home. But other than that, he was all in. Sometimes late at night when the kids were asleep, I'd sneak out with Jacob to grab dinner at places where we wouldn't bump into anyone we knew. It was risky and wrong, I knew, but I felt so happy in those moments. Slowly, I started pulling away from my husband. Instead of eagerly awaiting his return home, I became more distant and glued to my phone. As time passed, I felt like me and my husband were drifting apart. The excitement of him coming home just wasn't there anymore. Our talks felt awkward, like we were just going through the motions. I struggled to show interest in what he had to say, often finding distractions to avoid being around him. Our connection felt strained, and I knew it was partly my fault. But being with Jacob was like a breath of fresh air compared to the dullness of my marriage. Each moment with him felt fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in years. And as I spent more time with Jacob, the gap between me and my husband grew wider. Life settled into a routine for a while. When the kids were at school, Jacob and I would hang out at my house. When my husband was home, we'd text and chat instead. Just to be clear, I didn't love Jacob. I just loved the comfort and warmth he provided. But that blinded me to the fact that I was slowly ruining my marriage. A few months later, my brother unexpectedly decided to move in with us. Our house was closer to his college, so he thought it made sense. He didn't bother asking for my permission, which annoyed me because it meant I couldn't have Jacob over anymore. Plus, I didn't know my brother's schedule, so I couldn't risk him catching us together. He asked my husband instead, who was actually excited about it. He thought it would help me feel less lonely, especially since my brother and I were close. The kids were thrilled when my brother moved in. My kids adored him, and he brought so much fun into our home with his playful nature. Deep down, I felt guilty for being annoyed by his arrival, knowing how much joy he brought to my family. So my brother moved in, but I still wanted to see Jacob. So we started sneaking around, meeting up at hotels. It went on for a while until I realized my brother was more loyal to me than my husband. He'd keep my secret because he was my brother. So, why bother with hotels when I could bring Jacob home? Looking back, it was a dumb move, I know. I started bringing Jacob over, pretending he was just a friend. But my brother caught on quick. One day I thought my brother would be at college all day, so I invited Jacob over. We were getting intimate on the couch when my brother walked in. There was no denying it. We were caught red-handed. I sent Jacob away and sat my brother down, begging him not to tell my husband. I played the lonely card, knowing my brother loved me too much to spill the beans. He agreed not to tell, but he wanted me to stop seeing Jacob. I couldn't, though. Jacob was the only thing making me happy. My brother suggested talking to my husband, but I couldn't. I felt useless compared to him, and I didn't know how to bring it up. For a week after that, my brother barely spoke to me. He gave short, one-word answers, clearly weighed down by the guilt of keeping my secret. It hurt to see him like that, but I couldn't sacrifice my own happiness, especially when being with Jacob brought me so much joy. However, eventually, my brother must have reached a breaking point because he confessed everything to my husband. It was a weekend and everyone was at home, which was quite rare and exciting. It happened on a Saturday when the kids were at school. My brother mentioned he didn't have any mandatory classes that day, so he was at home too. My husband had decided to take a break from work and stay home as well. So, all of us were at home that day. I decided to rush to the grocery store to get something special to cook for us. However, while I was away, my brother confessed everything to my husband. Naturally, my husband didn't believe him. I mean, why would he? We'd been together forever, so the idea of me cheating seemed absurd to him. I only learned about their conversation later, but I'll get to that. Apparently, my brother was so angry that my husband didn't believe him that he promised to find clear evidence of my infidelity, but I had no idea about any of this. When I returned with the stuff and cooked, we all ate together. I noticed my husband seemed a bit more cheerful than usual and even a bit conflicted, but I didn't think much of it. I just shrugged it off and carried on with my day. I had no idea about the trap my brother had set for me, so I carried on with my usual routine. My husband dove back into his work, my brother focused on his classes, and I continued sneaking around with Jacob. On the day everything went south, it started like any other day. My brother was home, skipping his classes for once. When I brought Jacob over, my brother couldn't hide his disdain. He grunted disapprovingly and retreated to his room. I brushed it off, knowing how emotional he could be. Ignoring my brother's attitude, I took Jacob upstairs to our bedroom, and we were intimate. Looking back, I regret it all, but you can't change the past. Anyway, Jacob and I spent a few hours together before hunger struck. With only an hour left before I had to pick up the kids, I whipped up a quick lunch and even left some for my brother. After eating, Jacob and I left together, and I told my brother I was off to get the kids. When I returned home later, I noticed my brother seemed oddly cheerful, yet guilty. I'm no expert on reading emotions, but I could tell something was up. I had a feeling something was bothering my brother, but I knew better than to pry. He was always secretive and kept things close to his chest. Besides, whatever was on his mind wasn't really my concern, so I shrugged it off and went about my day. That night, my husband didn't come home, so I video called him with the kids. They chatted eagerly, sharing stories from their day. Despite me being home most of the time, they were still more attached to their dad. They missed him dearly, as they always did. The week passed by in its usual routine. I dropped off the kids at school and brought Jacob over. I noticed my brother skipping classes more often, always at home when Jacob was around. But I didn't dwell on it too much, chalking it up to him skipping lectures or struggling with a course. Still, I made a mental note to talk to him about it. Despite his annoying habits, he was still my brother, and I cared about him. As the weekend approached, I relished the rare opportunity of having everyone at home together. The kids were thrilled to have their dad around more. I decided to go out shopping, and my husband encouraged me to go alone while he looked after the kids. It was such a rare treat to have everyone at home together, so I savored the moment and went out shopping, leaving the kids behind. I did some grocery shopping, picked up some new stuff, and even treated myself to a manicure. My nail tech was thrilled to see me, and we caught up on everything since we last met. It had been ages since I had the time to visit her shop regularly, as my schedule was always packed. Ever since my involvement with Jacob, I filled every spare moment with him, leaving little time for anything else. So, it was a welcome break to spend some time with my nail tech. However, when it came time to pay, my card was declined. I was stunned. Why would my card be frozen? I tried to transfer money, but that failed too. Checking my account, I realized it had been frozen. How? Why? When? Thankfully, my nail tech was understanding and allowed me to sort things out with my bank later. She truly saved the day. Upon returning home, I was greeted by a shocking sight. My belongings strewn across the porch. I was at a loss for words, trying to comprehend what was happening. I knocked on the door for what felt like ages, only for my brother to answer and inform me that my husband had instructed him not to let me in. I was bewildered. Was this some kind of joke? Why wouldn't my husband let me into our own home? Why was he avoiding me? I felt a wave of panic wash over me, desperate for answers. My brother's words hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband knew everything, and he was heartbroken. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could my husband know? When did he find out? How long had he known? A million questions raced through my mind as I struggled to make sense of the situation. In a state of despair, I broke down into tears, screaming and pleading for answers. My brother revealed that my husband had videos as evidence. My heart sank as I realized the truth. The guilt written all over my brother's face confirmed my worst fears. How could he betray me like this? He was supposed to be my brother, my confidant. How could he do this to me? I didn't need a crystal ball to figure out it was my brother behind this mess. All I could think about was when and how he managed to record me. I was beyond distraught, not knowing what to do next. Frantically, I tried calling, texting, and even shouting for my husband from the porch. But my brother, clearly tired of my desperation, just slammed the door in my face. His guilt was literally written all over him. How could he do this to me? He was my brother. Left with no choice, I hailed an Uber back to my parents' place. Their surprise at my sudden appearance was evident, but they didn't push for answers. I even found myself short on cash to pay for the ride, thanks to my husband freezing our accounts. Luckily, my parents coughed up the money without probing further, sensing my distress. They simply urged me to rest and grab a bite if I felt up to it, though hunger was the last thing on my mind. After all, marriage had just gone to shit. After a fitful nap, I woke up to a full-blown nightmare. My husband, in a petty display of revenge, had looped in everyone we knew into a group chat and shared intimate videos of me with Jacob. The shock of seeing my private moments laid bare for all to see shattered what little remained of my composure. Tears flowed freely, but this time there was no solace from my parents. They knew the ugly truth of my actions, and their silence spoke volumes. My whole life felt like it was laid bare for everyone to see, and I didn't have a clue how to explain it all to my parents. All I could do was cry. I was weighed down by shame and regret. I tried to tell them that loneliness drove me to betray my husband's trust, but the words sounded empty even to me. My parents were disappointed, but they could see I was on the verge of a breakdown, so they didn't push me too hard. They said they'd call my brother to get the full story. It wasn't long before my brother spilled the beans himself. He was scared at first, knowing our parents would blame him. But he admitted he'd told my husband everything, even though my husband didn't believe him at first. My brother thought he had to act to protect his brother-in-law from more heartache. He made it clear how badly I'd messed up and how my husband didn't deserve it, especially when he was trying so hard for our family. Even though my parents were mad at my brother for turning on his own sister, they were stuck. After all, I cheated, plain and simple. They figured if the roles were reversed and my husband had cheated, my brother would have told me too. Throughout all this mess, my husband stayed silent, not bothering to talk to me or respond to any of my messages. Meanwhile, everyone in the group chats was going nuts, talking about what I did, like it was the worst thing ever. Friends were flipping out, sending me messages saying how messed up it was. My husband's family couldn't believe I'd do something like that to him, adding more weight to the guilt I was already feeling. But you know how it goes? Gossip spreads like wildfire. Jacob ended up seeing the videos himself. He sent them back to me, saying I invaded his privacy and then blocked me. Losing Jacob felt like getting kicked while I was already down. My parents tried to step in talking to my husband, but it didn't help. They didn't want me around during the talks, worried it might make things worse. When they came back, they dropped the bombshell. My marriage was done. My husband made it clear he wouldn't forgive me, no matter what. It was like hearing that even if the world was ending, he still wouldn't take me back. I'm still holed up at my parents' place, feeling like a total wreck. Finally, my husband did reach out and unfortunately told me that we're getting a divorce. He said he'd let me know when the papers were ready. He made sure to remind me it was all my fault, like I needed a reminder. He did say I could see the kids, but only if I let him know in advance. Apparently, he's cut back on work to spend more time with them, something he should have done ages ago. So now I'm left with a shattered marriage and no idea what's next. Court's looming and I'm not optimistic. I'm broke, jobless, and totally dependent on him. Plus I cheated, and he's got the receipts. I doubt any judge would take my side, and I guess I'm just sharing this mess to warn others. Don't be as dumb as me. Talk to your spouse. Get help if you need it. Don't let things spiral out of control like I did. Thanks for listening.